I rented a rather rustic camping grounds lot and moved an old trailer onto it. I had nothing to speak of at the moment, as the fire had claimed not only all my possessions, but the lives of my dear friend Mrs. Pennybiggles and my beautiful daughter Emily. All was a constant blur of thought. What was the next move? I suppose looking back on it, I was in shock. A total mental shutdown. I stared blankly into the abyss of my own private hell and tried with all my might to focus on the events that had placed me in this position. I would remain in this seclusion for several days, waiting for a sign to guide me, a direction I could turn to. It was a dark and lonely time. I received an unexpected call from Miss Cassandra Goth. She had read the terrible news of the fire, and of the untimely deaths of my friend and daughter. She was sympathetic and deeply concerned with my current state of despair. Might she stop by with a few university sisters and try to cheer me up a bit? She explained that a bout of conversation and a chance to socialize might do me well. I agreed. She responded with a cheerful "be right there." She arrived with her companions. They were a chirpy lot, full of young energy and warm conversation. They implored me to raise my spirits, to look ahead to the future. The conversation wandered from the typical topics of university life. They discussed the latest television shows they were fond of, and the newest rock stars of variously named bands. The girls soon began to filter away, mindful of their studies and the encroaching evening. Cassandra stayed behind. She kissed me. The feeling of her began to melt my heart. She was softly bringing me into her heart, and I allowed her into mine. I left Cassandra, being unable to gather any sleep for the night, and decided to make my way to the station. The crew offered heartfelt condolences, but were decidedly glad to have me back on the case. They had investigated Eliza's hit and run, and were currently having the evidence reviewed once more. They assured me they would have an answer soon. Suddenly an alert was broadcast on state radio. A dead body had been found. An aged professor. The location? A mountaintop laboratory. I rushed to the scene. The arriving officers met me and together we ascended the long stairway to the professor's retreat. My fellow officers commented on the long stairway to the top, a difficult climb to be sure. At the location we observed the body of the professor. He lay in a pool of blood, quite dead. I surveyed the scene quickly. I noticed one outstanding feature. The machine that was built to communicate with otherworldly inhabitants was gone. Someone had dismantled it and removed it. Who? And why? I left to continue to investigate and made the long trip back down the stairs. What fresh hell was this to become for me? My mind raced with a fever of organization of the facts as I knew them so far. Back at the station we explored the data so far. Several deaths, some in various states of decomposition, my discovery of the deformed and mutilated forms at the swamp, the rumor of something on the bluffs of Winterberg, and the creature in the basement. Although I had been authorized to pursue the case, it seemed as if I was constantly being stifled. My good friend came in with some news. It seemed they had found some evidence of the type and color of paint that may have been on the car that killed Eliza. It was being analyzed now. Additionally, they had also begun analyzation of the device that had destroyed my house and family. The results to be known soon. Once again a sudden announcement came on radio, another death. This time it was a nobleman of the state. The governor had been found shot to death in his home. We raced to the scene of this latest homicide. I knew that somehow, and some way, this was beginning to all become quite related. We hurriedly arrived at the mansion of the governor. He was quite dead, from a gunshot wound to his temple. He now lay sprawled on his expensive imported carpet in his well-furnished dining room. The officers began to collect evidence and photograph the scene. I surveyed the scene with a keen eye, but nothing could be discerned. Whoever had killed the governor had been allowed entry. It seemed like an assassination of sorts. I followed the trail in my mind. The governor had referred me to the professor, and the professor was murdered. The governor was now murdered. That led me to one conclusion. I had been directed to the governor by the director and his assistant at the headquarters of the State Special Investigations Agency. I needed to discuss this with them both and decided to give all haste to securing an answer to my queries. I found the bodies of the director and assistant director dead in his office. Both appeared to have been shot. My mind was racing as I phoned in the call for assistance. One by one, all these individuals had been involved with my quest, and had even sanctioned it. But they had all led me to the science facility. I took the opportunity to once more use the director's computer to search for any information. I was dismayed, yet not surprised, that all my previous certifications for authorization had been rescinded. I could no longer gain access to any further information at all. Why? My suspicions drew directly on the science facility. I began summarizing my report on my progress and forwarded it to my fellow officers. I wanted my comrades to have all the information I had gathered so far, just in case I were to not be able to personally divulge it to them. I left for the science facility. I had some questions that required an immediate response. It seemed the clues were leading me to a destination I could now only begin to slowly put the pieces together. As I left to proceed with further inquiry, I observed a junior agent leaving the building. I stopped him and asked him for a bit of his time. I wanted to know if he had witnessed anything out of the ordinary that afternoon. He thought briefly, then offered his previous sighting of a large luxury limousine that had arrived earlier. He thought nothing of it, as it had occurred frequently. He assumed it was a highly ranked individual. Throughout the day several officers of the government entered the building for a variety of reasons, he explained. Some quite mundane and others of a more secretive nature. He wearily explained that he was not privy to the latter in his position as a junior agent, and thus he did not know who was the occupant of the vehicle. He cheerfully referred me to discuss it with the director. I decided to withhold the director's demise from him. He would find out soon enough from detailed televised reports. I moved on to the facility. It assumed the stature of grandeur it had portrayed to me earlier. As I raced to the entrance, I noticed the quickened pace of the security forces inside through the glass walls of the building. Why all the commotion? As I entered the building, I was immediately accosted and placed into custody by an officer. Rather harshly, I might add. I was handcuffed and quickly assigned into incarceration. I decided to gather some fortitude through a brief nap. I would await my opportunity to devise my release, or rather escape, if you prefer. I fell asleep, and I dreamed. This time my dream led me to the old tree to the caverns below Willow Creek. I entered. It led me not to the caverns, but to the cemetery. I saw myself reading a child's book to my daughter as she listened intently. She played with her toys by her mother, as if waiting for her to join in her play. I was overtaken with melancholy and the pain of loss. She was such a little thing sitting there. My mind shifted. I was again at the site of the fire that had destroyed my remaining family. It burned around me. The feeling of hopelessness was overwhelming as I screamed into the fire for my Emily to emerge. It was to no avail. I could not control the past, and I strained to find a reason for it. I found myself in an uncontrollable state of tears, and cried without anyone to console my pain. It was all so very sad. I awoke with a start and in a cold sweat. I began to examine my surrounding and paced the floor. I gave thought to formulate my departure from here. I would try my hand at subterfuge. And so we shall depart for now. See you on the morrow, God willing.